In this chapter, we're going to discuss psychosocial development as it occurs in late adulthood. A couple things we'll talk about are self-theories, and those are theories that emphasize the core self or the search to maintain one's integrity and identity. So in late adulthood, most older people feel that their personalities and attitudes have remained stable over their lifespan, even in spite of the changes that may occur in their physical bodies. And also during that time, things, like objects and places, become a little more precious to individuals as a way to hold on to their own identity. Now, in discussing theories of late adulthood, there's what's called the socio-emotional selectivity theory, and that just refers to how older individuals, they'll prioritize regulation of their own emotions and seek familiar social contacts who reinforce their sense of generativity, pride, and joy. And second, we'll talk about positivity effect, and that's the tendency for elderly people to perceive, prefer, and remember positive images and experiences more than negative ones. Continuing on with theories of late adulthood, there's what's known as stratification. And in this regard, more specifically, stratification by gender. And that's just irrational gender-based fear that tends to limit women's independence throughout life. And so they talk about a couple other things, in regard to stratification by gender. For instance, younger women typically marry older men. And just the fact, too, that men seek medical help less than women. Continuing on with the discussion about stratification, there's ethnic stratification. And so that's just factors such as education, health, employment, place of residence. Those create large discrepancies in income by individuals by the time they reach late adulthood. And there's what's called income stratification. So that's basically how that affects older individuals, those in late adulthood. So please pause the video, take a look at these here. And here are some theories in regard to age stratification. And one is called disengagement theory. And so that refers to how aging tends to make a person's social sphere increasingly narrow, resulting in sometimes the relinquishment of their sense of role, and they tend to withdraw and become a little more passive. Now, second is what's known as activity theory, and that just refers to the fact that those in late adulthood, those type of elderly people need to remain active in a variety of social spheres, like with relatives, friends, community groups, etc., and only become withdrawn and as a result of ageism. So it usually happens unwillingly. Now, in regard to working in late adulthood, so the psychological benefits of work can be obtained through volunteer work. And also work provides social support and status, and it boosts individual self-esteem. And finally, down below here, just as a reminder, for many people, employment that actually facilitates generativity in their lives. Now, in regard to retirement, a couple things to talk about here. So they make the point that besides needing the money, some individuals over the age of 65, they tend to stay on the job because they appreciate the social recognition and the self-fulfillment that they receive from work and working. And so they mentioned that it was once believed that older adults were healthier and happier when they were employed than they were when they were unemployed, and that retirement led to illness and death. Now, that was a broad generalization. That is actually not a hard, fast truth. So please keep that in mind. Now, those maybe who are retired may be interested in volunteering. And so in order to maintain a sense of generativity, social connection, less depression, and better health. Now, talking about activities in late adulthood, those in this phase of development, they may tend to, while they're staying home more often, but they may tend to care for their own home and take care of their own needs a little more. And aging in place, that involves remaining in the same home and community in later life, adjusting but not leaving when their health fades. And they mentioned down here at the bottom, that definitely for women, especially, that interruption of their social connection is especially harmful to their health. Okay, a couple of things to keep in mind here. There's some terms here. One is called the naturally occurring retirement community, and that's basically, a community or a complex or a neighborhood whose population is mostly retired persons who moved to the location as younger adults and never left. And so that is a important reason for both aging in place and the naturally occurring retirement community is the social convoy, the result of years of close relationship. Now, another activity in late adulthood can be political activity. So feel free to pause the video and look at these statistics here. But seniors generally, if they do get involved in political activity, they will tend to write letters to their representatives, definitely identify with a political party, vote, stay current with the news. Okay, so we'll shift our focus now and look at long-term partnerships. And so that's just when spouses in strong marriages, they provide a buffer against old age problems and actually tend to protect each other's health. Please feel free to pause and look a little more in depth on these and think about these. Now, in regard to their relationships with younger generations, so they just mentioned a couple of facts here. That today some families may actually span 5 generations, and they actually have this term called beanpole family. And that's when multiple generations exist within a family, but only a few members in each one. So that, might affect friend and relative type relationships in late adulthood. Okay, so elaborating just a little more here, So extensive research has found that relationships between parents and adult children are affected by many factors. And so they list a few here. So please pause the video and take a look at these for further insight. Now, in regard to grandparents, they say that most people over 65, at least 85%, are grandparents. And there's factors that influence the nature of the grandparent and grandchild relationship. And they mention these, like their personalities, their ethnicity, national background, past family interaction, and age and personality of the child. So please take that into account. And when it comes to kind of a overall care for different, for the older generation, the actual middle generation decides how much the child and grandparent contact, how often that occurs, how much. So when it comes to friends and relatives, those in the older adulthood phase of development, they were saying, they mentioned a few little facts and kind of like statistics. Please pause the video here and read these. Moving on. Now, when it comes to the frail elderly, so definitely people over age 65, but more often than not, people over the age 85, maybe who are physically infirm, very ill, or cognitively disabled, they actually fit into the category known as the frail elderly. And a couple things to keep in mind here, it says that, most older adults, they become frail if they live long enough. So elaborating a little more on the frail elderly, they're talking about some of the activities of daily life, and they call those ADLs for short. But here are some of the actions that are important to independent living, and so they are laid out in the form of eating, bathing, toileting, dressing, and transferring from a bed to a chair. And so it's important to realize that inability to perform any of these tasks is a sign of frailty. Taking a little more further in this discussion, so there's instrumental activities of daily life, and that refers to actions that are important to independent living and require some intellectual competence. So that could be things like paying bills and things like that. And in regard to caring for the frail elderly, it definitely cultural differences play a role in who cares for the frail elderly and to what degree. Now, when caregiving results in resentment and social isolation, the risk of depression, poor health, and abuse escalates. So they talk about elder abuse here, and just want to make you aware that that's more likely to occur when the caregiver actually may suffer from emotional problems or depression. The caregiver that is frail. The care receiver is frail, confused, and demanding. And the care location is isolated where there's very few visitors. So all those can result in elder abuse. Now, this is just to, on a positive note, for long-term care, good nursing care is available, but that can be limited to those who can really afford that and know what to look for and how to choose that type of long-term care. A couple other types of care is what they call alternative care, and that is assisted living, and that's the a living where elderly people they can still have a sense of privacy and independence, but they still have access to medical care and supervision. And last but not least, they talk about village care, and that's elderly people who live near each other. They pull together their resources and they stay in their homes, but they also can get the medical assistance when they need it. So that concludes our discussion. And please complete your study guides and participate in the discussion forum for this chapter.